Hi, this is Nameless Ghoul from Ghost. You're listening to the Ray Show podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Ray Show podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and as always, we are recording in beautiful downtown Athens, Georgia. So happy October, everybody, and happy Halloween. We couldn't have a more appropriate guest on the show tonight. We have Mr. Dusty Gannon from the mighty Vision Video, and Dusty's going to tell us all about Vision Video, his journey. And we're also going to discuss their new video, In My Skin, which was recorded at the 40 Watt, and it's just amazing. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already, which I can't imagine you haven't. But we'll have Dusty here in just a few. Super cool guy, good friend, and so happy to have him finally on the podcast. And for any new listeners we have tuning in, welcome. We basically... here at the Ray Show podcast, focus on outsider art, whether that be in music with metal, punk, post-punk, goth. And, we try and focus on all the things that we're about here. And we welcome you to our little family. And check out some of our back episodes. And we're going to have a lot more coming for you throughout the end of the year and leading into next year, including at least one more live ratio show at Cine Athens in the lab that will be announced in November. We are at a new ratio location headquarters. We had a big move, so I'm sorry we have not been with you that much this month, but that will all change in November and leading into 2024. So as always, follow us on the socials at Ratio Podcast on Instagram. We're on Facebook and various other places, so look for us. And without further ado, let's get to our talk with Dusty Gannon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ratio Podcast. We are recording here in beautiful downtown Athens, Georgia, at Cine. We're in Theater 2, the haunted one, and it couldn't be more appropriate because today on the show we've got founder, singer, and guitarist of Vision Video, Mr. Dusty Gannon. How you doing, sir?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Right on. Perfect, man. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah.
And I guess this is appropriate. Do you feel any vibes?
Oh, yeah.
This
room
yet?
I think, whenever you enter a space like this that's like normally occupied by conceivably large numbers of people, it's always like really interesting when you're in it when there is nobody there, because I think it inherently feels a little kind of offset, and that's why I think horror movies that happen in theaters are really scary, because it's like, oh, it's this familiar space that's suddenly been sort of subverted. So I feel like it's very appropriate that we're here tonight.
Right. Just to break right into horror.
Yeah.
What's your favorite horror movie set in a theater?
Oh man,
That's
definitely. We were talking about it earlier. Demons.
Rules.
Lamberto Bava. And
Hell
it's
yeah.
like, it's just such a bizarre, kind of dumb movie, but I love it, and it's just fun. But it's also like intense and like it's got this sort of surreality, this like dreamlike quality to it that I love on a headier level with that movie. But it's also just like the dumbest, most like fun action kind of horror that you can get as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, everybody, we have the Fangoria cover star today. Here on the podcast this month, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But welcome the Goth Dad himself, and I want to start, with the sense of melody that you possess. It first took me by surprise when I heard "In My Side," and it's it's such a melodic, beautiful song. What is your first memory of creating something like musical?
I guess I was one of those people that had kind of a little bit of a knack in an inherent sense from a young age, because my first memories of playing any instrument or like doing anything with sound or music was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My aunt and uncle live up in New Hampshire in this really, really old farmhouse, and I would like just mess around with this very, very old piano that they had in the house, and I would like host like a recital, and I'd be like, all the family and friends coming, like you have like give me $1 and I'll play you the show. But I apparently was able to actually make some form of melody that wasn't like just totally intolerable for like a 5-year-old playing a piano that doesn't know what they're doing. So anyway, that's probably my first memory ever of like touching any sort of instrument and making sound. But I've kind of been in and out of music through probably every stage of my life up until now.
Right. Well, did you come from a musical family?
My dad played trumpet in high school, but he didn't kind of continue with it. He kind of knew a little bit. But I think my parents were both very musically inclined insofar as they were fans of music. So we always had music playing. Like,
oh man,
and this is so to give like a little bit of context too. My mom is like, German from like marrying an American soldier, moving to the States. So she's like really into like weird European new wave, and my dad was into like the classic rock stuff and like, heavier rock stuff. So there was a very eclectic sense of music in my youth because of my parents. And they were always like asking my sister and I what we thought of like, oh, this song or this song. So it kind of helped us develop that sense of taste from a very early age as well.
Do you have any records from that time period that you still listen to that
they
had in the house?
Yeah.
What are some of those?
Like a couple Phil Collins. Like I would say just kind of Phil Collins generally throughout various stages of his music career. But like Peter Gabriel was huge.
Yeah.
So came out at one point right before I think I was born, and it was like,
it's like 86.
Yeah, that was exactly. I was born September of 86, so like that was huge. And they went and saw him in Berlin, and
wow.
like so that and I'm like, there was a time when I was a little younger where I was like, oh, this is cool and I enjoy this, but when I was an adult, I kind of rediscovered it and was like, this is fucking incredible music. Like, this isn't just good. This is phenomenal music. This is like really top tier stuff. So I don't know. I just look back at all that and I'm just like so grateful that they were that musically inclined and not, in a technical way.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's also because, if your parents are like hardcore musicians, maybe they're like, hey, learn this instrument, learn this. My parents never did that. They let me kind of figure out music on my own terms, and it was way more enjoyable in that way.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a cool way to come up. Our household was a big Phil household as well, and a big Peter Gabriel. But you are a success story here from Athens, and a perfect example of the magic of this town. So now, did you grow up here your entire youth?
More or less. So, like, my very first few years on this planet were in rapid succession. So I was born in Berlin, and we moved in, I think, 2 years later. So like, I was born in 86, moved to California or Virginia, and then California, and then lived in California. We were there until I was like 5. But then after that, we came to the Athens area. So I've been here kind of on again, off again for like the last 20 some odd years of my life. So it's been quite a while.
So what was it like being a teenager here in town? Were you sneaking into shows and stuff?
Yes. And that's the wildest shit because so when I was 17, I dropped out of high school. I went to Oglethorpe County High. I was it's 20 minutes from here. You drive into Athens, you can get a job, drop out of high school. I wasn't learning anything out there because it's rural high school. But I moved to Athens, but I was too young to get into anything. And I was 17. I lived in the east side, and my roommate was 19, so he could. And I was always like, damn it, I want to go to this thing that he's going to. Because especially back then, there were a lot of 18-up shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to Go Bar, and I would sneak in. They're going to get pissed. If they hear this, they're going to be like, oh, you fucker, next time I see them. But Tom and Mark, they would sometimes not be paying attention, and I would go along the hedgerows, and I would sneak in. And I was going there to see more often than not? Dan Geller with Trade Center and DJ Twin Powers and all that, because I wanted to listen to him spin records, and I wanted to listen to World Trade Center. So we would, and then every now and then I would get kicked out, but sometimes I'd get in. And that was my first
and those nights, I snuck into the 40 Watt when I think they just fucking let us in when I was 15. But this is at the old location, and that night is still imprinted on my brain.
Right.
And I think a lot of magic comes out of that.
For sure.
But, your background's like a novel in and of itself. And I mean, for those who don't know you served in the Army. Mm-hmm. Which I'm sure we could talk about. We could fill 3 hours on that.
Probably.
But could you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, for sure, man. So in brevity, I mean, I guess I enlisted in the Georgia Army National Guard in 2007, and I was enlisted in that from 2007 to 2011. Graduated from Georgia, commissioned as an officer, stayed in the infantry, but went active duty, and did that for 4 years. Went to Germany, deployed with a rifle platoon to Afghanistan, and got out in 2016 when I was kind of done with it. There's a lot of it that was good, a lot of really amazing people that I met, a lot of really good experiences, but also just the heavy realization of what the military is used for, how it's used, and how it's kept away from the rest of society. People don't see it here. They don't see warfare, but they also don't see how the military really works. So they take advantage of that, and they sort of misuse the military for these it's just explicitly colonialism and its empire. But I just kind of saw the big picture for what it was, and I was like, all right, I need to get out of this because I'm not interested in, participating in something like this ever again.
And you're caught over there, and I'm assuming you realized this pretty soon off when you got over there.
Yeah.
How do you face that in your head?
For me, so literally there was a very long period of time in the lead up for our deployment where I was losing my mind because I went through this really dramatic kind of, I guess, paradigmatic mental shift in my consciousness, not to sound like a new agey douchebag, but when I was studying religion in college, and I'm not even I'm pretty agnostic atheist, but there's a lot of my understanding of the world shifted because of a lot of Taoism and Zen Buddhism, just reading about it and just realizing it was I'm fighting somebody else's conflict that I don't even really agree with. And so I had a really hard time leading up to that deployment where I was just I can't rationalize this and I can't justify this in my mind. But then there was a day where the one thing that really kept me going through this whole thing is the fact that I realized that A, I'm not a kid anymore, and B, I have 30 kids that are looking to me as a leader now in the Army to make reasonable, rational decisions to get them home safely and to keep them in my self-interest rather than things bigger than them. And I realized that was a bigger calling than any other misgiving of it. And I was going to do my best job to be moral, go over there, do what we needed to do in Afghanistan, but get those kids home. And I got to do that, and that was really fucking cool. So, like, you know, there's always good in the bad, and you got to find that sometimes. But, yeah, that was the only thing that got me through the experience was those 30 guys and that responsibility, and that was cool.
Well, do you still utilize some of the skills that you learned over there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the time, you know. I mean, I think on a base level, like just being out in public, I'm very situationally aware of like any room that I walk into or like any situation I go into. And I think that's like a unfortunate circumstance of living in America right now is like you've got to be aware of what's going on around you. But also my work ethic is like I feel like I'm just whenever I get really invested in things, I'm dedicated to like focusing on that. You know, and it just drives me in a way that pushes me past like conceivable limitations that you self-impose, and it's like I don't know, it just makes me feel like I have to work harder and fulfill a part of my former life, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Well, so you get out of the Army, and I'm not in any way trying to trivialize that transition, but you do come back to Athens. What brings you back here specifically?
So, yeah, I left the Army in 2016, and I was like, well, what's the next step? And for a while I thought I can, you know, go be a therapist or a social worker for veterans because, like, I know what it's like to have to talk to somebody when you come back from a conflict, and, you know, these are, like, people that have never been to war or whatever, and so I applied to the grad school here for social work, and I got put on a wait list, which was fine. That's like a normal thing. And I came back to Athens, was bartending full time, and that's when I like joined the fire department and all that. So yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that brought me back was kind of going back to school, but also the reason why I chose Athens, because I could have gone to school anywhere, was just like I wanted to play music, and I was like, that's the place where I know that it's really easy to find like-minded people, the proper facilities for it, the right like community around a music scene for it, and that's what really interested me in coming back here specifically to do. Well, at the time I didn't know it was going to be Vision Video, but you know, moving forward,
you start making music on your own and you're writing songs, and then you get connected with Emily, Dan, and Jason. That's a staggering amount of talent. You know, how did it come about getting those cats together?
It's cool. It was a very like Athens way. So, because we have this sort of nucleus of the service industry here. So like everybody that's in this kind of rock and roll world or music world in general, I'll say, is just like, I mean, 90% likely to be either a current or former bartender. So, you know, I was bartending at the Georgia Theater, and Jason was a barback. And I had been like posting clips of me like just playing little riffs on like Facebook or something. And Jason was like, hey, I really like those songs. And we talked a lot about music because he's a huge fan of the Replacements, and I love the Replacements. So we bonded over that, and he was like, hey, come over to my house. Like, I know you like my punk band, which is She He He. And because I love She He.
Oh, they're one of my favorite bands
amazing,
of all time.
Amazing performance. So he's like, you should come over to the house. I've got a rehearsal space. I'll put some drums to those guitar. And it was just us two at first. And then Dan called Jason. I didn't even know Dan personally. I just knew him from sneaking into shows.
Yeah.
And I was like, Jason called me up one day and he goes, hey, Dan Geller wants to play bass for us. And I was like, oh shit, really? Oh cool. Like we get to hang out. That's pretty fun.
Right on.
So he came in and immediately kind of joined in, and then we played one show on the rooftop of the Georgia Theater as a 3-piece, and Emily was at that show. And so she saw the show, and then I knew her through another mutual friend, again, service industry. And she's classically trained in piano, like from the age of 7 on. But she never played a synthesizer before. So we put that in front of her, and she just killed it.
Had never played one and just took to it immediately.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was awesome. So
she has such good energy. She's, and then, you got Fusco's one of the greatest guys in the world. Dan's a god. It's you guys all seem to work out really, really great.
Yeah.
And the name Vision Video, I know you've answered some of these questions.
No, it's good. I love this
zillion times.
This is one of the best ones.
But for some of our listeners, those not from Athens, can you tell us a little bit about the name and what it means to you?
Yeah. So growing up basically in this area, you had two options. Well, we'll call it three options for movie watching experience. You had the movie theater, you had Blockbuster, and you had Vision Video. And Vision Video was a video rental store from, I think, the mid-'80s up until 2016 or 17. And they made it through this like crazy streaming age way into it. And it was because it was so loved. It was usually college student run, locally owned. They had a couple locations throughout downtown and through Athens area. And, it was just one of those places where I grew up in a formative time learning about like horror through that experience. The 5 for 5 movies, 5 nights for $5. So I would go in there, and there was like on the east side, there was this, at some point in the ages, there was like this punk rock girl that was working there, and they have a huge employee pick section, and she was great because she was in all the like cult horror, and she was real cute, and I was like real enamored with her. But I'd go in there every week, and I'd bring my movies back and be like, hey, and she'd be like, oh yeah, you watched this, like you should watch this next. Like, oh, you watched Evil Dead this week, you should definitely watch Dead Alive next week because you'll see some influence or whatever. And I was like, okay, cool.
I miss that time so
yeah.
much now. You're like making me like wistful.
But that's why we picked it. We went through like 3 months I guess it was 2 months of like name dropping every single day in a group chat. It was like 10, 20 names a day. And we were always like, no, it's not right. It's not right.
Oh, it's torturous.
And then one day Jason jokingly was like, oh, we should be called like Vision Video. And we kind of laughed. And then we were like, well, actually, that's really fucking good because it's something we love that had just kind of died. And I felt like that kind of tied into our messaging a little bit and our ambiance. But it's also like an homage to Athens.
Yeah. And
Athens is an homage to itself through its music, through between the African American music influence, like early on in the 20th century up to the 70s with dance punk and college radio rock, B-52's REM. I mean, all this incredible stuff happened here. So I don't know. It's like the name to me is an homage itself to not just Vision Video, but like this broader thing that we love, which is Athens, and it's a really cool place.
Right on, man. I couldn't have said it better, man. Well, yeah, okay, you've never been afraid to tackle like a challenging vocal. And like when I was talking about your sense of melody on that first album, and I remember, the first time I heard this, like just talking to everybody, like, have you heard him sing? And I'm talking about, off the first album, Inked in Red, and then Static Drum.
Yeah.
Somebody might look at that. I find that a challenging vocal to like maintain. But, this all leads me to your first record. What are some of your memories of putting together that first record?
It was cool, because for me that was like a novel experience entirely. I'd never been in a band that, took it seriously enough to make it past, first couple interactions of live performance or whatever. So for me it was like, oh, this is how this really works, and this is like the serious world behind music that I've never had access to, but I'm really starting to learn about. And that was, recording that record was with Tom Ashton of the March Violets in his Sub Von studio, just at the very outskirt of Athens here. And, he's a master, and he's like just somebody that's able to translate exactly what you want so well. And it was just like this amazing experience, laying down songs that we've been playing for about a year, and they kind of change a little bit in the studio, but in like better ways than you can conceive. And it's it's just a really beautiful process, and it made me fall in love with this whole world and be like, I got to keep pushing on this thing because this is really cool.
So do you like the studio?
I do. I'd say the pre-studio part, like writing, I don't enjoy that much because it's really painful for me to go back into memory and to like write lyrics. But it's also just like I'm a bit of a nut when it comes to like if the song doesn't make me want to move and dance or at least emote or feel like in a physical kind of way, then it's probably not good enough. So there's a lot of me like writing stuff and cutting them and just being like, that's not acceptable for me to put out here to an audience that really cares about what I'm trying to say. But once you get into the studio and it's all cold down and you know what you're recording, it's such a joyful, like beautiful, it feels like energy is just concentrated.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's so focused and everybody's like in a good mood, but it can also get like tiring and a little exhausting, but it's always fun. Like the undercurrent is always fun, and that's a really rare thing to find in the world.
Yeah, you're always creating something. I mean, it's got to be. So that's the first band. This is the first band you were in a studio with.
Oh yeah,
wow.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay, the album's released, and we're talking about First kind of a little bit tonight, but and you start touring and start spreading the word. Now, how many tours have you done now?
So, I mean, just looking back at the last year alone, so I've been away I left the fire department last summer in June. So since then, we've had
good month to leave it.
5 major tours. Yeah. So a lot, and I mean, I'd say probably in the time since 2021, yeah, I mean, it must be like 8 major tours that we've done.
Well, much like the recording process, what are some of your first memories of being out on the road and bringing this music to people and playing all these cool venues and just getting into it?
Yeah. It's awesome because, we didn't go through a lot of time where there was like literally nobody there. There were a couple shows where it was like real sparse, but we always had like decent crowds coming out because we built this audience online of music during the lockdowns when we would have been touring. So that was like a nice thing. But it was always almost a little more fun in some ways when you'd have like 2 or 3 people in a show because you just like, it's such a different experience.
Just go crazy for
that. Yeah. And you play the same exact show. But I miss a lot of that, like the early like days of touring where it was like not nearly as comfortable and it was a lot like harder, but it was a lot of fun in the novelty of it.
Well, do you have a personal memory of a show that when you really said, man, the momentum's picking up?
Yeah. We played last year, so this was 2022, at a place it was a night called Das Bunker in a place called Catch One, which is a big club in LA. And it's about a 500 cap room. And we had a good 400 people in there. And I was like, okay, this is like how this feels like where this is really starting to build. And, that was right before I left my job. So I was kind of like, that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is possible. And I think, if I work really hard and like don't give up on this, like we'll be okay. And we have been. Yeah. So that was a really cool moment, like walking out on that stage was like, as much as I do love the like 5-person shows where it's just super intimate and it's just, you just connect on a really weird level. There's a lot of energy that comes from like 400 people, and that's it's like, wow, this is amazing. This is cool to know that what I'm putting out in the universe is like resonating with this many people. Like it's very, humbling to me because I feel like I'm beholden to those people and I need to make sure I do my best for them,
It's a very serious, burden to have. I always thought whenever I see somebody tell somebody, an artist, what their music really meant to them, and they get it across out of their nervousness, it just chills me, in the best way.
Absolutely.
And so you're doing all these tours, and when you record Haunted Hours, how ready are you just chomping at the bit to get into the studio with all you've learned over these tours and the experience of the first album?
Yeah, so that was it was interesting because like we wrote a lot of that record kind of in the studio because it was right after the lockdowns had lifted that I started writing, and everybody got really busy again and life like started to come back in. It was really tough to like make this record in some ways because I had to kind of like go, hey, here are the songs, and hey, we've scheduled the studio at this time, so we need to kind of have this done by then. So a lot of it was written in the studio, and it's like a little raw around the edges, but I like that because the whole record is like very emotionally raw, and it was not like there's a lot of really conceivably like catchy, like kind of poppier songs in that record, but they're very like from a very like dark, weird place in my life that was kind of purging through that record. So I really love the fact that record's like really raw and weird, and
I love that record.
So it's a totally different experience from our first record, and it'll be a totally different one from our third one as well. Right. But yeah, it was just like it was very enjoyable to be back in the studio because that joy was there. But I was also like, I don't know, it just felt like I was just getting rid of like this really bad side of my life through that record too.
Oh yeah. Well, you mentioned the third record, and how far along are you with that?
I'd say we're about honestly, like a quarter of the way. There's a lot of work that we're about to dig really deep into. But it's coming together really comprehensively, and I feel like it has it's one of those records that's like, if you try to guide music and you're trying to make music intentionally, like I want it to sound like this, it doesn't work that way. And it's probably not the best way to try to approach music. I think you should just start writing and make it be what it wants to be. Which maybe I'm like stealing from Rick Rubin, but it's, I read his book not long ago, and I really agree with what he says about like, let the art just come through you and be the conduit and get it out there, and don't try to force it in a direction. Yeah, this record is, it's very angry, it's very dark, but it's also like my core message with everything I talk about and all these records is like, yeah, things are really fucked and things are really dark and they may get a lot worse even, but that's no reason to fucking give up hope.
Right.
Because that's like death. Like that's it. You just might as well lay down. So there's a lot of darkness and anger, and there's a spirit of like fighting. It's almost like protest record in a lot of ways. But there's there's always going to be that kind of undercurrent for me that's like, it can't be totally like pitch black darkness. There's got to be some hope. And I think that comes through in what we're doing.
Well, in the middle of all this, how's the Goth Dad come about?
Oh, man. That was just like one of those weird things that you just never conceive to be something that will pop off. I remember, so effectively what I do when I write music is I start with guitar riff, metronome, or a drum machine, and then I write what I call scratch tracks, and it's just like I'm trying to develop the vocal melody at this point. So I'll just make up gibberish words, or I will make up like a funny thing. Mm-hmm. And one day I was like, wouldn't it be funny if there was like this 50s TV dad, maybe even Midwestern, who was like a TV dad, but he was also like heavily goth and like knew his shit. And was like, yeah, I've seen The Cure in the fucking 80s. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I was like, that's the funniest shit I've ever thought. Like, I just was like laughing to myself. And I told Dan about it, and he's like, oh man, that's pretty cool. Like, and I was like, well, I was thinking about making this like stupid theme song like thing just to like as a joke. And he's like, oh, do it. And I made it, and I sent it to him, and he just laughed so hard. And I was like, all right, we have to put this on the internet, right? And he's like, yeah, 100%. And I was like, this is so silly. And I like made up like, with makeup and the cardigan and all that shit. And I was like, I did the theme song, and that popped off. And people on social media were like, well, what does he do? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, what's he about? Like, he's a character, right? And I was like, oh, okay. I can make videos like as this guy. And I didn't think it was, I just thought it was going to be like, whatever, And you put it up there, and I remember like TikTok, it was just like, it was scary. I was like, what the fuck, dude? Like hundreds of thousands of people were seeing it like every day, and it was millions of views. And I was like, what the fuck? And then all of a sudden, like literally overnight, I had potentially this audience. I was like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing this. And I kept making like dad jokes. But I was also, my interest with it very quickly was like, all right, you have to teach the kids like what like good goth shit is. Not this like dumb like high school like fucking movie version. Like, yeah, you got to be a music listener of goth. You got to be a fan of the music, but like go to the fucking nights, go to the shows. Everything else doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you do that stuff, you're goth, you're in. It doesn't like you don't have to look a certain way. This is the shit that matters. This is like the healthy way to approach this scene. But also here's all the good music in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been doing a lot of that online, and I need to do more of it because I see these kids, they're younger people that are entering the scene, and I'm excited for them because I want them to enjoy it. But they're also like constantly like asking me like, well, so-and-so on the internet told me that if I don't like this band, I'm not goth or whatever. And I'm like, this is the dumbest conversation you could ever have with that person. Like, that's so like, it just makes me so upset that they have to deal with this. I'm like, just enjoy the music and the subculture. That's all you got to do, and just have fun with it.
Yeah.
And just like let yourself, I don't know, feel like you belong to a scene, and that's the most important aspect of all this stuff.
Well, if you got a lot of good, like if you've connected with a lot of your fan base through that goth dads.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a very regular occurrence that people come up and say, like, hey, I really appreciate the like more tender goth dad videos that you make because like my dad left when I was 6, or my dad doesn't accept me because I'm trans and I identify as a woman. I am a woman now, and things like that, like really tough stuff. And it's and I always like to remind them, like when I talk to people, I'm like, well, like I appreciate, I'm really glad that brings you value, and that's why I like to do this stuff. And why you feel like a little bit better. But ultimately I can't supplant like an actual father figure, but that doesn't matter. Like as long as I can bring like 30 seconds of feeling okay and joy into your life, like that's pretty cool to me.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I check it out all the time, man.
Hell yeah.
It brightens my day. And I love that you're still such a fan of music. Watching you and Dan's DJ nights, those have to be so restorative. The awesome goth nights, and I love the covers you pick.
Thanks.
And I think that's education in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
Something like Monitor. I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Emily really seems to own that one, and it's
Yeah.
so fun to see live. So what's next for Vision Video? Got a couple more here.
Yeah, no worries. So I mean, this is a really exciting time for us, like right now. Because we did the Fangoria thing, which was amazing, and we just shot this video for. I guess I can pretty much just talk about it by now, because once this is released, it'll be out. But so we re-recorded In My Side because it's like it's one of those songs that you record it, and I love the original. There's nothing wrong with the original, and I just think it's so well done and so well produced and recorded. But when you play a song 1,000 times, it changes. And that's what happened with that song. And it got a little dancier, but also a little heavier and a little weirder in places. So we're working with Ben Allen now in Atlanta in Maze Studios, and he's like this amazing producer. I mean, he won a Grammy. We're working with Gnarls Barkley, I think.
Yeah.
And but he has like this incredible range of stuff that he's done. He's done everything from like Bad Boys records in the 90s to like Washed Out,
Oh wow.
He did Within and Without, and like he did Erasure's last record. So he's just done like some really bizarre stuff, and I thought he would be really good at capturing what we're trying to do, and he has. So anyway, we recorded with him. We have the song coming out on the 17th, and we shot a video here in Athens, Georgia, which I showed you guys earlier. You've seen the video. So the video is also getting premiered by Fangoria, which is awesome, because that kind of came after the fact that we had decided to do the video, which is really cool. So like synchronicities all kind of came around this thing. It was awesome. But the video is a sort of love letter to Athens and to specifically the 40 Watt, which is where I saw my first show there, B-52s, when I was 16.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the beating heart, like that and the Georgia Theater are like the two valves of this beating heart of Athens music.
Oh, yeah.
And so we shot this video there. It's a love letter to Athens, but it's also a love letter to horror, because the song is kind of a horror song. But we hired 5 professional makeup artists, I think several of which worked on The Walking Dead, and like Haley Trefiro was the lead team member. She just did Exorcist, the new Exorcist movie. So like incredible talent, and then also character actors from The Walking Dead, and stunt coordinators and prop producers, and we just got into the weeds and just hired everybody. And this is all through the director of Elwood Quincy Walker. And he's just he's like this 23-year-old guy who's just a prodigy. He's a phenomenal director. And we coalesced all these cool people, and we shot a video about us getting killed by demons and pissing off a witch. Oh, also Lulu, my friend from Montreal, one of the top burlesque performers in the world. She's the main character.
It's
It's
so
really fun.
cool. Seeing this thing, let me just say to everybody out there listening, love is too weak a word to describe how cool this video is. And it really captures the decadence of the 40 Watt on like a good night. Love the way it's shot. And I won't spoil anything, but my gosh, you better be at your computers when this drops.
Hell yeah. Thanks,
as
man.
they say. Now you also have a festival coming up.
Yeah, so this is like it's in its infancy, and I know that in a few years from now we're going to look back and be like, hell yeah, I'm so glad we did this. But this is number 1. So this is we have a Southern Gothic on October 28th, and that is the same night as the Wild Rumpus, which is like this huge festival in Athens, a free open air parade that you can just jump into, and it's just a big costume parade, and then it ends in an open air dance party in the streets. But at 10:30, everybody goes off to venues. So I thought, what better night than to start a goth rock festival in the South? But also Athens is the perfect place. We've got hotels, we've got the venue, we've got, just tons of cool shit to do here. Without it being like in Atlanta or some other bigger city. So this is like a really cool place to facilitate something like this. So our plan is we've got Twin Tribes headlining this month with us and Tears for the Dying, and then Dan and I are going to DJ afterwards. But next year we've already confirmed, and I don't think they'll care about me saying this, like March Violets are we're going to do 2 nights. They're going to do Friday night, and then Saturday night I'm going for another like really, really big band from the 80s. I'm trying desperately to get to come do that, but those will be the only 2 like legacy bands. Every single other band I'm going to try to book directly through me to them or their booking agents to get the best of the bands that we've seen on tour in the past couple years and all the places that we've gone to. We're trying to get about, if I have it my way, I want to do at least 14 bands total, split across. It'll be the 40 Watt and Flicker, hopefully next year.
Right.
So, we're trying to really make this, I want to make Athens fucking weird, man.
Hell yeah. My God, if there was I'll sign up for your religion. Because people, I want to reiterate, man, Rumpus, when I moved here, it just warms your heart. If you have any Halloween feelings,
yes, it
is really, you should travel in for it and for the festival.
It really is it's one of those things, man, where again, talking about 2018 earlier, it was a bad year for me. This is when we started writing the record. I remember going to Rumpus and just that was one of those things where I was like, this is like, there's still magic in the world. There's still like a sense of levity and beauty in weirdness and being a little different and being off kilter. And that was one of those like sparks of hope that I needed just to get by, so there's like something, I mean, there's my personal experience with that, with the Rumpus, but I think that everybody that comes here goes, that's actually my partner Scarlett moved from Germany to be with me, and then the night that I think that she kind of realized that Athens was cool was fucking Rumpus. She was like, this place kind of
it was
awesome.
Porch Fest before.
Yep.
Did she do Porch Fest?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Sorry, everybody. We're rambling on about Athens here, but for the 4,000th time, how fucking cool is it to be on the cover of Fangoria magazine?
Oh man! So Phil called me. Phil Nobile Jr. He's the chief editor of Fangoria. So Phil called me out of the blue one day, and I had no idea who he was, and I never answer my phone ever because I'm like, it's always on silent. And I just got this voicemail, and it was like, "Hey, this is Phil. I'm the chief editor of Fangoria magazine. Turns out I'm like a big fan of your band, and I really, really am interested in your story, and I want to write kind of a Rolling Stones type article on what you're doing. So if that sounds interesting, like, give me a call." I immediately was like, "Holy shit!" I was like, "What? Yeah, like, dude, absolutely." And this is an honor, and I'm like, I'm blown away, like, and he's like, "Yeah, man. So I'll give you a call. You're going on tour. I'll give you a call around this time, and we'll have a good talk when you get back from Europe." I was like, "Cool, awesome," because this is summer. And got home. We talked for 3 hours about everything. I mean, it was like one of those people, you meet, and then it's like you feel like you've known them your whole life. And I was like, "Yeah, this is one of those guys." And we talked for 3 hours, and we could have talked for more. And he's like, "This is like, I'm getting to the limit of what I can even process." Like, so I think I got it. And he sent me a copy of it beforehand, and I read it before it went to print, because he's like, I just, I don't want to say anything about you or your experiences that you don't feel comfortable with. I was like, no worries. I read it, and I was like, dude, this is like, I was like in tears. I was like, this is the best thing that encapsulates my experience and how I feel about things and what I'm trying to do with this band and with our messaging and all that sort of thing than any other magazine. And it's like, of course it's Fangoria. Of course it's like it's your people,
Oh, yeah.
It's like, these are people that understand, like, your average horror movie fan isn't into horror because, like, they see like the bright and beautiful side of reality. But anyway, it was just awesome. It was just like a really incredible thing. But anyway, he called me, or he sent me a text a couple weeks ago, and he was like, "Hey, just a heads up, like, now it's going to print, so I can tell you you're on the cover." And I was like, because I'm in like a little window on the side of the main cover, and I was like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
I showed Scarlett, my partner, and she just screamed. She was like, "What?"
I screamed. What are you talking about?
I was losing it. I felt like I was going to pass out for a minute.
I mean, because we were talking earlier, Fangoria before Rue Morgue and all that.
Yeah.
Fangoria was the one back.
It's the one,
and
man.
it's coming back, and it's
Yeah.
I couldn't think of a more of appropriate person to be on the cover.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks.
Well, you've been so good to talk to us tonight. Just a few little things.
Yeah.
Off the top of your head, what 3 horror movies would you recommend that most people haven't heard of, since we're in the season now?
Okay. That people haven't heard of. I guess it depends on what level of like horror fan. If it's somebody that's like kind of marginally exposed to horror, that I was like trying to explain why I love horror that like this much, I would say, you got to watch 69 Night of Living Dead.
Absolutely.
Like, you got to watch that. You've got to watch, let me think. This is such a tough one. So Night of Living Dead for sure. I would say like Nosferatu.
Oh yeah.
Go way back. and see and just get it like no
Some
dialogue.
Of the most creepy images you'll ever see in a movie, and the Herzog version's good too.
Yeah, and then I would say go in a totally opposite direction and go as like, and this might be like a controversial choice for a third, but what we were just talking about, Suspiria 2018, the remake, not even the original, but the remake. I just feel like it's smart, it's heady, it's beautiful, it's entrancing, and it's like it's one of those horror movies that you can just get lost into and really absorbed into. Yeah, those would be the three that I'd be like.
Those are great, you know. And I mean, one thing I think we've talked about before is there's a movie I want everybody to, if you've never seen Nightmare City, you know, it's one off the beaten path a little bit that we were talking about.
Hell yeah.
There's this. It's just if you think you've seen every zombie film, this is a good one.
Yeah.
But you know, we're in this special time of the year. Are there any special records that you reach for during this season that are continuingly inspiring?
Yeah, that's a good one. With Sympathy by Ministry, because it's like it's their best record. It's their best record. I won't say it that way. It's my favorite record of theirs. But it always, you know, there's the, you know, they're literally songs about Halloween, but it has a very like autumnal, like Halloween-y vibe through the like industrial synth pop, but also kind of like hip hop sometimes.
Right.
I just love that record, and that's a record you will always hear on a Halloween party mix that I make. Like you will always hear one of those songs. So I would go with that, and honestly, Return of the Living Dead soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks ever made.
So amazing.
So anything off that, like my favorite Cramp song, Surfin' Dead, was written for that soundtrack. Yes. And apparently, have you heard the story of that?
Yeah.
They had like a weekend to write it.
Yeah.
So they were like, fuck it. Yeah.
See, I was like 12 when that movie came out, and that was the first movie I saw in the theater that I wanted to watch twice in a row.
Yeah.
We met Linnea quickly,
oh, yeah.
You know, and oh my God, I usually don't get starstruck, but
Same.
It's like, you know.
I met her at Pensacon. We played down in Pensacola at Pensacon this year, and I met her in February, and like I have her tattooed on my leg, and I was like, hey, it's really nice to meet you. We're like guests also, like we're playing this weekend, and we got a table down the way, and I just wanted to say hi. And she's like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. I was like, this is kind of weird, but I do have you tattooed to my leg, so I feel like obligated to show you. She's like, yeah. She was like super excited, so I show her the tattoo of trash that's like on my leg here, and
oh, that's amazing.
And she's like, oh, that's super cool, and I was like, yeah, this is fun. So basically, yeah, she's like a total sweetheart.
Oh yeah,
she's just like the nicest, most unassuming person I've ever met.
Oh yeah. Well, Dusty, thank you so much. We had some delays here due to jazz night. And we got
good.
So
it's a good cause.
Yeah. Thank you for sticking with us, and good luck on the finishing up the third record,
Thank you.
tour, and the festival. Now, what's the best place for our listeners to find out info on Vision Video or get in touch with you guys?
Sure, yeah. So the hub for it all, I guess, is just like visionvideoband.com, which by and large has, I guess, every link to like social media and Spotify. But it also like has direct links to our merch, which helps us a lot. But anything musically oriented, I'd say like Instagram is the most reliable source of like directed music stuff. Right. So yeah, just visionvideoband.com. You can find all that there, and it's all like any patronage of such is very appreciated.
There, you heard it there. Go buy some merch. Well, my friend, thank you so much for doing
this.
Thanks,
man. Thanks for having me. This is a treat for me.
Right on, man. Oh, man, I want to thank Dusty Gannon for coming on the show and filling us in on all things Vision Video. Make sure you follow them on their socials and get out to a show. They are a live band if there ever was one, and a super cool group of people. So their success is well-deserved. And, yeah, that's our show for tonight. I hope everybody has a decadent and safe Halloween. We'll be having some more episodes coming along for you very, very soon. But until then, stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.